Test. 1, 2. On m'entend ou pas? Test. On m'entend? Test. Ça marche.
Donc vous gardez un seul micro. Ouais. Ah non, c'est toi qui commence à ça. Hein?
Tu peux t'asseoir.
Ouais. Attends, je fais bon ici. Le micro soit glissé ici. Ah oui, là, oui, ok.
So welcome. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this working? It is working. We're going to start. I think a few people are still coming. I'm Sibylle van den Hove, and I'm going to moderate the evening tonight. So first of all, a warm welcome, and thank you for being here. I think we're going to have a very nice evening, hopefully. So first of all, this event is organized by 5 co-hosts. There's 2030, the CEO Alliance for Sustainability, and we focused on CEOs and board members, and our view is really a systemic take on sustainability. There's Groupe Bernard, which is the Belgian Institute for Directors, and their focus, of course, is broader business governance. There is The Shift, which brings together business, science, civil society, and their focus is every time the organization as a whole. Then there's Chapter 0 Brussels, also a focus on directors, on board members, with climate governance as the entry point. And finally, our host physically also, the Solvay Business School of Université Libre de Bruxelles. And of course, their focus is on business education, and inside the business education, more and more topics linked to sustainability. So these are your hosts tonight. We tried to put on this slide what brings those 5 organizers together. So I think we all believe businesses are key players in transforming our societies towards more sustainability. And this starts by the way we do business, because the entry point here is business. And all these organizations try to offer high-level knowledge for business people, for business leaders, and create spaces like tonight where we can inspire people, we can each learn something, and we can exchange. So this is one of the objectives tonight. So what are we going to do? If you were paying attention to the invitation, or when you looked at the first slide tonight, you can see that I changed a word in the title. So I changed the title to Geopolitics, Sustainability, Transformations, and Businesses. On the invitation, it was Sustainability Transitions. I took this liberty. Why? Because in my personal view, transition is a bit of a complacent word, concept. It gives the impression that we can smoothly and almost relatively easily transit our current socio-economic system towards a sustainable system. And I think it's going to need much more radical transformations. But that's my own take on it. So I'm responsible for this little change. What are we going to do tonight? We try to explore the links between industrialization, resource distribution, and international relations. Why did we want to do something on geopolitics and these topics? First of all, because in our organization, we try to take the systemic view, and so we need to contextualize. And I think if we don't look at geopolitics and resources, we don't contextualize. So this is what we're going to try to do today. And so when we discussed how to set up this session, we said, okay, how can we see how geopolitical dimensions are affected by, but are also affecting the current polycrisis. And by polycrisis, I mean this combination of systemic crises in the economy, the environment, the social, and so on. So specifically, we hope that we can focus tonight on geopolitics of resource access, but also resource use and resource transformation, especially looking at countries with either more poverty and or a different level or poorer levels of governance, but not only. We're going to look at questions of industrialization, re-industrialization of Europe, but also industrialization elsewhere. We're going to look at approaches, protectionist approaches versus maybe more collaborative approaches for the future, and overall ecological burden and how we share the burden. That's the plan. So to do that, this very simple challenge, we have two great speakers here, and I'm really, really happy to have you too. So there's Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, and he is a professor of global governance, and I take my notes here, and public policy at Bristol University in the UK. He's also in the University Ekwueme, the Federal University Ekwueme in Nigeria, where he's leading the Center for Climate Change and Development. Chuck's told me that he started with industrial chemistry and then moved to environmental policy and management and ended up with a PhD in political sciences. And so he works on mixes of policies, strategies, institutions, how you organize institutions to address climate change, natural resources degradation in Africa in the context of sustainable development. And he's also been engaged in many international projects and collaborations and with businesses, also NGOs in Africa and elsewhere. So that is for Chucks. Welcome, Chucks. And then we have Sébastien. We go along many years now with Sébastien. Sébastien is an executive director of IDDRI, the French Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, based in Paris, and it's a think tank, and they work on developing policy solutions, fostering political agreements for global environmental governance. That's their entry point, and they look also quite a bit at Europe and sustainable transformation for Europe. Sébastien is also the chairman of the French Global Environmental Facility. He's the chairman of the Scientific and Technical Committee there. He's a faculty in the Earth System Governance Network, and he started as a polytechnicien, so a hydrology engineer, and then he went into public policy, did a PhD in environmental management. He also did some foresight studies with the French Ministry of the Environment, and had a lot of activity at the science policy interface, especially in research programming at the EU, the French, and the subnational level. So that's for Sébastien. Welcome, Sébastien. So how do we do this? Now we're going to go immediately into two presentations, first Chucks and then Sébastien. And then we will leave them, the two of them, to talk to each other. So we will witness their little chat. So they do a ping pong chat. And then after that, so they'll do that for about 15 minutes. And then after that, we have a good half an hour for you to comment, to ask questions, and to share your thoughts and doubts and ideas with us. So I think with that, we can start with Chucks. Do you have the slides here? So sorry, I'm sitting because I have a problem with my foot. So I'll be sitting. Chucks, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sibi. Thank you, Sibi. And thank you to use this one. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Push the button. This one. Okay. Well, thank you, Sibi, for the introduction. I'd like to also thank all the organizations that are working together to make this event happen. I'm going to make 3 key points. Number one, I will make the point that geopolitics and sustainability transformation or transition are deeply intertwined, affecting each other in profound and complex ways. The second point I will make is that while these transformation and geopolitical risks pose huge challenges for businesses, it also offers a lot of opportunities. And I will explore some of those opportunities and on how businesses could capitalize on the opportunities sustainability transformation presents. And then the third point I will make is that developing countries in general, and Africa in particular, occupies a very central role in the geopolitics of sustainability transformation, and that Europe should not ignore Africa. And on that point, I will also argue that emphasis on justice and equity will be important in developing a working relationship with Africa that serves the interests of both Africa and Europe. So first, the interconnection, first slide. The slide is basically just so that nobody falls asleep while I'm presenting. But the interconnection between geopolitics and sustainability transformation are very, very deep and multifaceted. First is the energy security and shift to renewables. We see how the invasion of Ukraine in 2020 and the subsequent sanctions on Russian fossil fuels forced European countries to accelerate their shift to renewable energy. Nations like Germany, UK, and many others ramped up their investments in wind, solar, and other green technologies to reduce their reliance on Russian oil. This geopolitical event sped up European transition away from fossil fuel while highlighting vulnerabilities in energy security. Now, many of us know that the quest for oil and gas or other natural resources like gold, or even the access to certain rivers and passageways have always been the mainstay of high-level or high-wired politics for centuries. It's always been also the reason for invasions and for wars. And there is no reason to think that that is going to be different in the context of renewable energy or clean transformation. One of my friends just wrote recently that climate change has moved with the European Green Deal, US IRA policies, and many other industrialization, green industrial policy, that climate change has moved from an arena of low politics to an arena of really high politics. Consider also, number two, rare earth minerals and critical mineral supply chain. China controls much of the world's rare earth metal supply that is critical for technologies like wind turbine, electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels, etc. And this dominance is leading other countries like the EU, Japan, and the US to try and develop alternative supply chains, invest in domestic mining operations, or to partner with some Latin American countries like Chile and Bolivia to try and break the hegemony and the dominance of China in this area. This is also leading to new strategic investments in Africa. I was speaking just downstairs about the Lobito corridor, a $100 billion investment by the US to revitalize a 100-year-old railway line in southern Africa. The strategic alliances for battery metals, the demand for lithium, for cobalt, for nickel, and critical EV batteries has led to new geopolitical alliances, as I've been describing. Now, the EU Green Deal and border carbon taxes is another example of close relationship between geopolitics and sustainability transformation. The EU Green Deal, which aims to make EU climate neutral by 2050, is now including a carbon border adjustment mechanism that taxes imports from countries with lax environmental standards. This geopolitical tool is intended to pressure non-EU countries to adopt greener practices and otherwise face penalties. I will later argue, if I have time, that the EU has made a big mistake, a strategic error in not thinking very carefully about CBDR in the operation of the CBAM.
CBDR?
Yeah, CBDR.
Can you just explain
Common by differential responsibility principles and capabilities, which is a core equity principle. Okay.
CBDR.
Common but differentiated responsibility principles and capability, which is a major equity principle in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We can explore that in our ping pong. I want to draw your attention to the dimension of food security and agricultural transformations or transitions. We see how Russia's incursion into Europe disrupted not only energy markets, but also global food supply. As Ukraine has been a major exporter of wheat and other agricultural produces, countries have been prompted to reconsider their food systems and invest in sustainable agricultural practices and technologies. By the way, this has also had huge ramifications in Africa, where food prices have gone up the roof and led to a huge dimension of food insecurity. But African agriculture and climate resilience is another dimension. As climate change intensifies, countries in Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa are increasingly relying or looking for new international partnerships in order to boost their agricultural production. These efforts are tied to geopolitical strategies for fostering stability and curbing migration linked to climate-induced food security. Then we have the issue of water scarcity and regional conflicts. This is playing out right before our eyes, especially in the Nile Basin dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia. Egypt has sworn that if anybody dams the Nile again, blood will flow through the Nile. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has sparked geopolitical tension, unprecedented level between Ethiopia and Egypt. And in Sudan, water rights and access have become a major issue. Water scarcity is crucial. Water security rather is crucial for agriculture. And we can see how climate change is making matters very difficult. We also have, of course, climate-induced migration, which Europe need to care very much about. We're discussing this downstairs. And I was making the joke, but it's not supposed to be a joke, that if Europe cannot deal with the small boats, what are you going to do when the big boats begin to arrive? Because we see a huge number of people that are being displaced in Africa as a result of climate change. Certain statistics suggest up to 32 million people by 2050, and where do you think they're going to go? So this is a major issue. But as I said, my second point, the geopolitical calculus and sustainability transformations, they pose threats, but also there are opportunities. Sustainability transition involve large-scale changes at multiple levels, from local to regional to global. The commitment to clean energy, tripling renewable energy by 2030, net zero, climate neutrality, all of this are going to lead to massive opportunities for clean and sustainability industries, and is going to also lead to major challenges for some other industries. At the same time, geopolitical challenges such as resource scarcity, energy insecurity, or trade disruptions can push businesses to innovate. And I want to suggest at least 3 key ways that businesses can gain through this geopolitical political calculus and sustainability transformation. Number 1, by creating strategic alliances in sustainability. Businesses can leverage geopolitical alliances to achieve sustainability goals. We can, for example, multinational corporations can align their sustainability strategies with government policies and international agreements to foster long-term competitive advantage. One example could be corporates partnering with, in the context of the EU Green Deal, but we'll also see some companies aligning with their Chinese counterparts and benefiting hugely from the Belt and Road Initiative projects. It has been argued that sustainability has become a new form of soft power, and that businesses that are aligned with their governments in exporting sustainable technologies and models of circular economies can reinforce their influence in international environmental diplomacy, especially in Africa. The second area has to be by decoupling. And here, I mean, really looking to reduce dependency on foreign supply chains and becoming much more local in production and the development of domestic renewable capabilities, both to mitigate and reduce risk. We already see this in Europe, but also a huge number of companies in the US trying to invest in solar domestic manufacturing to avoid or at least reduce supply chain shocks from geopolitical tensions with China. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in November in the US election. If there is a trade war, this is already becoming very imminent, and this could really shake things up. China has shown that it will not hesitate to use its dominance on critical minerals by saying that it's going to even go more protectionist in terms of certain critical minerals that are very necessary for expanding U.S.'s dominance in the military strategic dominance. Businesses can play diplomatic roles in sustainability. Companies can operate across borders and act as intermediaries to ease geopolitical tensions by adopting sustainability practices and fostering international collaboration on global challenges like climate change. We, for example, have major tech companies like Google and Microsoft that are leading in international conversations around data centers powered by renewable energies across countries. Nigeria has become a favorite place for Bill Gates to visit recently, and a lot of the conversations are really how data, AI, blockchain can help to power sustainability transformation in Africa. And I want to end now my third point, which is the role of Africa and emerging markets. Emerging markets are often overlooked in sustainability discussion. However, the geopolitics of sustainable development will increasingly involve, if not revolve, around emerging markets, India, China, but also Africa. And I want to suggest that within this context, sustainability finance can become a major geopolitical tool. And here, can you show my slide? Yes. What you see here is a huge gap in finance needed to implement Africa's NDCs. And you can see the small red tiny bits is the amount of money that has come from the private sector. This suggests a huge opportunity for climate finance to be used as a soft diplomatic tool in Africa. According to IEA, Africa will need 28 billion in concessional capacity or capital by 2030 to mobilize the required 90 billion in private investment for clean energy. To achieve its energy and climate goals, Africa needs between 130 to 190 billion annual to bridge its infrastructural gap. This money needs to come not only from public sector, but as I already indicated, from private sector. Next slide. I want to show, 2 minutes. Yeah, that's more than enough. So this is, again, I was talking about this in downstairs. This is the technology needs assessment that we did for Cameroon. And I was sharing how up to 80%, in some cases 90% of funding that go to Africa ends up trying to deal with the issue of mitigation. And why this is important, there's a huge range of technologies that are very, very basic from a European perspective that can help to enable the transformation in Africa, but also really help to build resilience. And by the way, as I already suggested, building climate resilience in Africa is necessary to stop the influx of climate refugees. And the next point I want to make is on the issue of critical minerals. This is a major, major issue in terms of geopolitics. Africa controls a huge number of it. The DRC alone supplies 70% of the world cobalt. Zambia is home to the world's richest deposit of copper, which is central to wind energy. Africa holds significant deposits of the world cobalt, 52.4%, bauxite and aluminium for production, 23%, graphite, 21%, manganese, 46%, and on we can go. The demand for these elements are surging, sometimes by 150%. And of course, Europe has launched the Global Gateway Initiative, attempting to regain control lost to China's influence. And it's important that Europe follows through with its promises. But as we were discussing downstairs, that Europe also needs to change tactics. Africa feels now that it's come a little bit of age, that it can negotiate deals, and it can play the beautiful bride. So Europe needs to strike a good balance between moralization and respecting the sovereignty and African ability to dictate the path that it wishes to follow. And I was making clear that this doesn't mean to abandon every form of ESG. Well, quite on the contrary, it means to have a constructive dialogue and negotiation and try and find a balance. Because talking with a lot of African leaders, they really do want to deal with Europe, but they also feel a lot of frustration that Europe likes to talk the talk, but not bring money to the table. So I think I've run out of time, so I'm happy to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sibyl. Thanks, Chooks, for this presentation, and really happy to be with you tonight. So just to make clear that we actually work together with Chukwumerije and that we try to make sense. You can read the report that we've co-written with others on what green industrialization means for the partnership between Europe and Africa. So I don't believe I'm going to be counter-argumenting what Chooks has been saying, but rather try to make the link with current debates in Brussels that are extremely active about, in particular, I would like to choose the wording economic security that was extremely present in the report by Mario Draghi. And we actually have now a commissioner for trade and economic security, Maroš Šefčovič, who was formerly the executive vice president of the Commission for the Green Deal. And so a lot of the geopolitics that Chooks was presenting leads our public authorities, but also many business strategies to think in terms of economic security, security of supply in critical raw materials, but also in terms of short-term price competitiveness, trying to secure the profits and secure the supply chain. And my two main points tonight would be to say that we will have no economic security without sustainability. And I want to make some arguments in that direction. I believe you're quite a constructive audience on that side, but I'm really happy to have your contradiction on this. Actually, on my second point also, my second point would be to say we will have, in Europe in particular, no economic security without building real industrial partnerships with third countries, these emerging markets that Chooks was mentioning. And before I go into my two arguments successively, I just wanted to really tell a little bit more about the Draghi report. I mean, I'm not sure, I cannot say that I've read it completely, so please be kind with me. I just want to say what is the atmosphere. It's really driving a lot of the conversation in Brussels, in the Brussels European institution. Sorry for mistakenly saying that Brussels is only the capital of Europe. It's also the capital of Belgium, of course. What I mean is that it's driving a lot the discussion around the next Commission and the conversation between the French government and, for instance, and the European authorities. And my assessment of the Draghi report is that it's put a lot of emphasis on competitiveness and the fact that Europe is lagging behind in terms of competitiveness compared to China and the US. But I like a lot of the sustainability conversation. I liked much more the report by Enrico Letta, the other former Italian prime minister who has been ordered a report, because Enrico Letta was saying if we think about why we need a common market, we need to give a direction, and sustainability is the direction that we need. But I will try to argue that economically there is a reason why Europe should bet on sustainability particularly. The other thing that is, I think, important in the report by Mario Draghi is that he's really talking not just about domestic issues, about our competitiveness, but also the external dimension of this security of supply. And I like a lot the idea that in the report you find something about the fact that with specific countries that are our suppliers, and on lithium it's probably more Chile than Africa, for instance, we need to build trade and investment partnerships. And I like very much the idea that it's not just security of supply, it's about trade relations, but it's also about investment relations. And I think that's a key element of progress in the debate, that we talk about investments partnerships. The only thing that I like is that I don't like is that it's only for specific countries, not thinking that actually we need, as Chooks was arguing, to have a connection with all these emerging markets, because they are our partners, not only for securing supplies. So that's just to make a link with the current debate. I don't know if that's Draghi report is taken by your community of business as something very important. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that I think we are experiencing a shift in European policies, where we are going to experience much more state and EU scale intervention in policies. I think the response to the IRA is not finished, and a lot of potentially more state aid to companies, potentially more protectionist measures, potentially more direction given to innovations, etc. So that issue of how we define those policies is very important. But the 2 points that I want to make tonight is that if we want to ensure that we have competitiveness and economic security, we need sustainability, and we need real industrial partnerships with third countries that are not just trying to compete with China and the US. So on my first point, on why sustainability is actually the right type of economic bet for Europe, I want to make the economic argument, and not just the idea that we need to protect the planet. That's generally where I come from my sustainability think tank, that, I mean, planetary boundaries are there, we need to protect the planet. But I think it also particularly makes sense for Europe. So, because of this China-US rivalry, economic competition, and trying to decouple one from the other, what we have now is an assessment that Europe is actually lagging behind these two major economic powers. And we are going to try and develop a new investment plan. And I think what my argument would be to say it's very hard to try and catch up on the same lines of innovation or the same lines of technology than these two major powers are going. And we need to set a long-term objective for long-term competitiveness to find a specific edge, a specific angle to the space that could be the European space in the economy that is now unfolding with decarbonization and digital transformation occurring. So of course, I think Chooks was mentioning that we need to, that there are lots of opportunities for innovation with the transformation to sustainability or decarbonization. The trend about decarbonization and digital for me is a trend. I'm not seeing how it could be meaningful economically for Europe to disinvest from decarbonization, even if for the automotive industry it's quite complicated now to try and keep the horizon of getting out of the combustion engine to go for the electric vehicle. But still, I think this is just the way forward, and that's just the trend. What can be specific to Europe in terms of innovation in sustainability is that we are very resource scarce. So circular economy, sufficiency. I mean, sufficiency as a business model is a key challenge in the business school. I'm teaching that at Sciences Po. How can you build a business model and create value while aiming at producing less stuff? That's quite complicated. But at least circular economy is something that I think is something that is very important for Europe, because it's much more resource scarce than the US and than China. And we also have this emphasis that we had in the former version of the Green Deal about climate and biodiversity protection and zero pollution. Part of zero pollution and biodiversity has been stopped quite drastically in the Green Deal, and I'm not sure that this is going to survive. But actually, there are lots of companies in Europe that try to innovate to be sustainable on all these issues and not just on climate. And the last thing that I wanted also to discuss is that probably there is something that Europe can cultivate in terms of an angle in this globalization and this race between the US and China, that is not so much to try to be the technology producers and the battery producers instead of China, but be much more champions in how you deploy innovation, in the financial innovation, the organizational innovation, the business model that is about the deployment of technologies. I used, when we discussed with a group of you just before, the fact that the way we organize public services, for instance, is very innovative in different ways in different places of Europe, between public and private, between who funds what, who invests in what, etc. And that's the type of thing that we can be proud of and be also try to cultivate and disseminate. So that was my first point on saying there is a necessity to find an angle for our economic security to be really viable over time. And that angle, to me, is about having our specific version of sustainability. And probably what I would add, but that will not fit in my time, and I need to finish soon, my second point, probably the issue that Chooks mentioned about not just mitigating climate change, but being resilient to climate impacts is also something that we need to cultivate as a specific angle to make a difference, to have a differentiation in globalization. So my second point is to say, we need to secure, of course, supplies of these critical raw materials. We need also to secure supplies of other intermediate products. For instance, it's good if Ghana chooses to develop green textile and sends us textile, and that we do a part of the processing in Europe. So it's not just about raw materials, it's also about intermediary products that we need to ensure, because we are very often a resource-scarce continent. And I think what I want to advocate for is that we should not just look at third markets, emerging markets, and not just China, US, but the rest of the economies, not just as suppliers. I mean, in the Draghi report, you find this specific selection of countries that are suppliers of critical raw materials. But Africa is actually also our future markets. Africa is suppliers, and African countries need to be also, as much as possible, stable political allies in the world. And if we want to have political allies, we need to ensure trust by building strong economic relationships and not just suppliers in an extractive way. For the moment, Europe is still very much perceived as being extractive, on top of taking unilateral trade measures like CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It's also looking at, let's try and build a deal with Namibia to import green hydrogen to Germany. Let's try and see how we can break a deal on having iron from South Africa for our steel industries. Actually, this needs to be, I think, much more transformed into a discussion about building an industrial partnership where both parts are able to have a share of the value and a share of the jobs, and not just trying to have all the jobs here, because that's the current political debate in Europe, to try and reindustrialize Europe. So the reason for that is that many of the countries in Africa have a very strong increase in their active population, and they need to find jobs for these youth. And at least some jobs will have to be in the industrial sector. Some might be in the service sector, but we need to ensure that industrialization becomes a reality in those countries. And for that, there are several issues. First, that we try to build, when we are in the suppliers, when we believe that the relation is a relation where they supply us with some important elements in our economy, to make sure that we build real industrial partnerships with them, where it's not a zero-sum game about the jobs that we have here, that we want to claim to have here in Europe for our industrialization, are not going to be in Southern Africa, for instance. And we hear a lot of stories in the steel industry. I mean, I heard also lots of negative stories in the steel industry recently, but there are positive stories where there are things, rather than importing green hydrogen from Namibia to build green steel in Germany, we should rather use green hydrogen in Namibia, Botswana, or South Africa for at least the first transformation from iron to steel, and then export something that is already processed, because that probably makes more sense economically and energetically, even in a continent that is energy scarce, while Africa is going to be energy abundant. So that type of reasoning is going to be very important, to try and not be looking at these supply chains in a zero-sum game where the value that we have is the value that they have not, or the jobs that they have is jobs that we have not. So that's to me a very important point. Another thing that I think is very important is also about, I'm going to talk about something that is rather symbolic. It's the way that we consider economic players from African countries. I could talk about Latin American countries because Chile is in the same position on lithium, on building their own industrial capacity. They want to be considered. And very often you might think, oh, again, there's something about recognition of our colonial past, etc. Yes, that's part of the question. But they want to be considered as innovators, as being able to develop their own industrial cluster, and really as equals in that game, and not just as the ones to which we consider we leave some residual type of jobs that we don't want to have on our continent. And I think that is still not the way that we are perceived, we business players, we public policy players, when we interact with our African colleagues, and it's being said very harshly, very often to the development agencies that they still have not understood that. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm getting to my conclusions. One of the two key points that I want to make, to some extent what I'm talking about is more a bet on the future than a pure demonstration that we are going to be able to organize these industrial clusters. And so my conclusion is to be very honest with you, and also, so I want to convince you, but at the same time I prefer to be honest. Reindustrialization in Europe, I'm not sure this is going to produce lots of jobs because a lot of the productivity will come from machinery, machines, automation, and not so much from having jobs in the industry. So I'm not sure it's going to be easy for African countries to capture jobs in the industry sector either. So I think we need to be honest in that relationship, that this is going to be very complicated. But that does not mean that we should stop aiming at organizing these industrial partnerships. And the second thing that I think is very important, Chooks was saying there is an immense opportunity for sustainable finance to get invested in the needs of the African continent. Well, actually, for the moment, we need to be facing the fact that the European players are not investing. They are reluctant or they are scared. They see the risks. For instance, I can quote a French bank like BNP Paribas that decided to get out of the African market, the African financial market, because they feared that they would be sued by extraterritorial law from the US, because they need to always trace that there is nothing associated with terrorism, and sometimes they don't feel that they are able to do that in African contexts. I'm not sure they're right to do that, but just to tell you, we are telling a story that is the positive story that we need, but a lot of the trend is not on the right side. And so one of the interesting things, what I'm so happy to be here tonight and discuss with you, is if we want to organize these industrial partnerships between African countries and European countries, we need to understand why it's so complicated for business players to invest in African countries, because for the moment that investment is not there. We are not seeing that happen. And so that's my main point, and probably that could engage already in a conversation with Chooks before we hear from the audience. But that would be my main also transition to a conversation with you, Chooks, on things that you might want to ask me or things I want to ask you. Maybe you want to react to my...
Thank you first, Sébastien. And so you now have about 10 minutes to discuss between the two of you. And then you get ready with your questions.
We don't have resource scarcity. A microphone. So. Well, as you said, we work very closely together. So there isn't a lot of disagreement. In fact, I don't see any disagreement. I want to start with a general question before I probe into some specifics from what I heard. And I want to ask you about what are some African leaders. One perception they have when I speak with them is that they point to what some are calling a climate backlash in Europe, the growth of far-right governments and populations in Europe. And then they say, oh, Chooks, you're trying to push us into more of these sustainability transformation when Europe is actually complaining, when the populations and citizens in Europe are already complaining that Europe is going too far. So what should I say to African leaders that ask me, that make this point to me?
So that's really the key question. It's not an easy. I will not have an easy answer. I mean, that's something that you can also react on, because I'm not the only European in the room. So please help me out, but also contradict me. One thing that I would say is that we've seen a lot of a backlash by economic players that was not so much on the direction, but on the method of the Green Deal and on the pace of change. So some players are saying, I'm happy with the timing and the objective, but it's just the method. It's too cumbersome, too much regulation, and the very example is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that is just positioned as something that was, lots of voluntary reporting was good, but now that it's mandatory with so many indicators, it's just not helping. So there is something about the method. The second thing is that some players, like in the automotive industry, they claim that if we would wait a bit, it would be better. That was Renault, the French automotive constructor, recently trying to say, let's wait a bit, we're not sure, and trying to introduce actually fuzziness and chaos in the pathway to decarbonization or electrification of individual vehicles. And I saw a lot of the other players, even the Germans that are not in a good shape either, saying we need to have stable horizons, and so let's keep the stable horizons. So my main point was, my first point would be to say, from the side of economic players, the only sector that really said let's drop the objective was the food sector, which is a problem, actually, a big problem. But on the rest, I see more of the majority of investors who've said we need to keep the pace. Actually, we're in Belgium. The Antwerpen Declaration in spring was not very good on the objectives of climate. So a lot of industries, I know lots of industries who have not signed up to that because it was not clear enough on the objectives. So it's true that there is an uncertainty, but I would say that on the side of the economic players, they prefer stable objectives, horizons, than reshuffling again. But that might be this question. I mean, I'm sitting on a think tank, I'm a non-profit, so you're the ones who need to be in the competition, so contradict me if you think that's important. And then on populations, I would again make a distinction between the far-right parties who use ecology to divide, ecological transition to divide, and when you ask actually citizens in Europe what they claim, I could maybe speak rather for France than the rest of Europe, because it might be very distinct, very different in different member states. But in France, they think we need to make the transition. They just are not at all happy with the unfair distribution of the effort on the poorest in society or on themselves. And so that's what, I mean, that's a long answer, and the African leader would already be walking away from me, because that's not the elevator pitch that he expects. Or she expects, but so that would be my answer on that side. How do you feel that this would be received by these leaders?
Well, on your last point, they will say, well, we can see that within Europe there are significant populations that are crying foul, and pointing to the regressive nature of sustainability policies. And yet, Africa has been asking for equity and justice to become a key pillar of global climate policy making, and have gotten little or nothing in return. They will point to the fact that there has only been 2% of investment in the total amount of clean investment globally. Only 2% has gone to Africa. Africa has just 1.98% of renewable energy investment, and actually nearly 52% of those is in just one country, South Africa. And yet, the broad swath of Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, is a very fertile place for investment in solar and other modern renewables. Africa has been calling for technology transfer and capacity building. Again, events in TRIPS, trade-related agreements, and even the fossil fuel treaty that you mentioned. They're all working against the poor countries. And so Africa complains that there's been a lot of push from Europe and other parts of the world for them to make change at a very fast pace, but that the issue of equity and justice hasn't been a big part of Europe's concern. But I want to, and then I have the microphone, make another point, which is not in a disagreement with you, but in an agreement. But to say that this partnership that you've talked about should not only be, government level, big industry partnership. It can also be soft partnership. I would imagine that if we have a room like this, and this is a challenge to 2030 partners, and half of it is European business leaders and half are African leaders, and we sit together for a day or two, the amount of diffusion of knowledge that is going to take place will be incredible, as well as building just relationships that will create opportunities. Because a lot of the time, people just fear what they don't understand. But by being in the same room with somebody that's actually putting poles on ground in, say, Morocco or Nigeria or Ghana, can open up a lot of opportunities for this soft power that I've been describing. So partnership at the level of brick, mortar is great. But partnership at the level of intellectual collaboration, sharing of knowledge will also be very, very fantastic. I think one area that Europe don't really understand is the amount of intellectual or soft power that they have. When I was many, many years at Reading University teaching, I realized that nearly 30% of all heads of meteorological organizations in Africa have somehow passed through Reading. And if you check the number of CEOs in big African businesses that have studied in Europe, there will be a lot of them. And I think that Europe needs to get much better at cultivating these influencers and bringing them back here, sharing knowledge, and seeking softer ways to influence them, but also to help to understand the market in which they're playing and then open opportunities for us. So I think that level of partnership is also very, very crucial. Last year or two, I was at the Brussels headquarters, the EU, and we were talking about the need for long-term partnership. And this didn't seem to me that INTAP and other key players at Brussels really understand the need for long-term research, consultancy, business, soft partnership. And I just wanted to make that point. And maybe you want to leverage on that to say what of it.
Maybe shortly, Sébastien, and then we'll open the floor to the...
No, I think on this I completely agree, and Chuks was mentioning that we are talking to the development, international development, now called International Partnerships Directorate at the European Commission, where we try to foster those types of long-term collaboration. Actually, I just want to raise a question, but maybe not to Chuks because that would be too long, but also to the audience. Because we are at the same time, I'm trying to point at a potential contradiction to see if that picks up, if that is picked up in the audience. We are trying to say that there is an opportunity of Europe to be positioned on sustainability. I was saying that personally, and to some extent, that's again the story of Europe being standard setter, and by because the market in Europe, the internal market is still a very big market globally. We can be standard setter, and that's a kind of a soft power through standard setting. But at the same time, we also know that for third countries, the standards that we set are barriers to their capacity to trade with us. And so I'm I don't have the solution to that point, but I believe that we need to probably work also on that to see how we can help these partnerships through knowledge to make that these standard setting are not disfavoring the partners in third countries, but that they might be at least a kind of a weapon in the economic war with US and China. And so trying to build these alliances around the standards might be something, I'm not sure if that really stands as a reasoning. That's why I'm asking that more as a question.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. And now I would like to open the floor to anyone who wants to ask a question or make a comment. I like to have questions from women, men, non-binary, young, old. So the next one will
first,
be a
and
woman.
I first
Yeah.
hand over to a woman.
Please,
But Eddy van Hemelrijk, representing KDG Business University, also representing Rethinking Economics. The question that I have is the underlying narrative that perhaps needs to shift. I think when we talk about geopolitics, it's also based on a neoliberal economic system. As long as we have that system in place, we have a lot of competition. I hear both of you asking for more collaboration and cooperation, but is that possible in a system that still focuses on profit and shareholders' wealth? So my question is to you, because you also teach business, you mentioned it. So, and you have a lot of people here in the audience working for organizations. As long as we value a company's assets on profits and growth, doesn't it make it very difficult to start working together? China, US, Europe, and Africa is a very young continent with a lot of soft skills and power, but they are still teaching or learning from us the neoliberal way of doing economics, which for sustainability is a nightmare. So my question to you is how to solve that? Can we change the narrative? Can Africa take the lead? Can Europe take the lead? Or what's your position?
Who wants to go?
I think that's a great question. In my book, Global Justice and Neoliberal Economic Governance, I make the point that basing environmental cooperation on the tenets of neoliberal competition poses significant dangers to global justice. And this is one of the reasons why Africa has struggled to attract the level of equity justice considerations. But also, there has been a lot of publications from the other side showing that the competition that is inherent in neoliberal economics actually propels innovation. And so we have to accept that there can be a balance. And often, that it is, if we work hard, we can find some of the areas where there can be some compromise. I basically think that if it is all about profit maximization from a capitalist perspective, then it's very difficult to meet equity concerns. But I do think that what we have seen in global collaboration is that, yes, geopolitics plays a role, but there's also been very interesting achievement from an equity and justice perspective. In 2007, for example, we have the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund in Sharm el-Sheikh. This was seen as a major triumph for equity considerations. Well before then, we have the entrenchment of the common but differentiated responsibility principle and capabilities, which I was talking about, generally recognized as a major equity principle. And on the basis of that CBDR, there are several provisions talking about how Europe needs to take the lead, how a significant amount of finance needs to go to developing countries. There is a promise of 100 billion per annum by 2030, which, well, for me, it's not really the amount that is important, but it's the concept, the principle of not leaving anyone behind. Then we have also quite generous provisions on technology transfers and capacity building. Analysis that was done at least last week by China shows that China, even though that they are often derided as not contributing enough, has contributed about 40 billion. You can question, of course, the accounting. But I make the point that I don't think that we have to completely remove competition, nor can you totally eliminate geopolitics. it is as old as human being. And some will explain it from an evolutionary perspective, the desire to survive. But I think that with good institutions and injecting morality considerations, equity consideration, we can temper these profit maximization with some cooperative instincts that can profit everyone. And Europe in some areas have been quite good at doing this. Sometimes we look at some of the Nordic countries and what they have done. Norway putting up a huge sum of money for sovereign wealth, which is now, of course, redistributed. But we're also seeing recently in Africa, in Nigeria specifically, the removal of fuel subsidies that was intended to, in one sense, help the energy transition that has ended up hurting the poor the most. So institution is very critical, as well as robust discussion. One of the things that Sébastien and I have pushed in our previous report is the need for dialogue, an open space on energy transition dialogue between Europe and Africa that will bring African leaders, think tanks, NGOs together to discuss. Often when you discuss in an open way, you can find opportunities for collaboration that benefits everyone. I still believe in the possibility of mutual collaboration if the will is there and the institutions are there to temper the more diabolic justice profit instincts.
I try to be short in my answer because but the question is very central. I have 2 points. The first point is even without looking at international relations, I really question, I mean, if we are serious about planetary boundaries, we need to be serious about sufficiency. And if we're serious about sufficiency, the current organization of shareholder capitalism is problematic. So there is something about how we govern companies to ensure that we don't just look for short-term profitability, to put it in a very... So that's a first statement. That means not that I know exactly what to do. I mean, in France, we have a law that enables companies to have not just a profit mission, but another raison d'être, another mission. I'm not seeing exactly that changing completely the way the strategic, the way the chief sustainability officer can defend its point with the chief financial officer, because still finance and shareholder matters. So that's something that is ongoing. I don't have the solution, but I see your point. But related to what we've discussed tonight, I think what is very problematic currently is the way that countries and territories desperately try to attract investments. Because and we have a lot of wealth to be invested, but a lot of that wealth is in the speculation on housing markets and in savings, or in financial speculation. So bringing back that money to industrial investments and trying to organize an international investment discussion that is not just about pure competition. When you see the way that Caribbean islands dream of attracting the cruising ships to their islands, because that would bring development, because there is no other investments being made, etc. This is the crazy thing about international investment competition, to attract them at whatever cost possible. I mean, Burkina Faso was happy to do any type of tax exemptions to anybody who would invest in agriculture in Burkina Faso, and actually nobody came. So I'm caricaturing, but it was at that level of radicality, and so I believe that's why this discussion about how we regulate investment in a way that incentivizes shared investments, and at the same time and pushes those who invest from Europe in Africa to leave a bit of the value there, etc. This is a completely new way to look at investments and how we incentivize them. And when Draghi says we need to have new trade and investment partnerships, politically it's going to be a nightmare, because for civil society, for good reasons, investments agreements are just ways of dominating third countries. But actually, this is the type of investments deal that we need to try and build between Europe and those countries if we want investments to be fairer. So how do we come back to a conversation where we try to have that conversation without being the dominators in the room? I believe that's one way we need to tame this neoliberal order in the way it organizes competition between territories.
Thank you. Yes, please, Sam. Have to run. Yes. Sorry, we only have one mic. This is a sufficiency in microphones.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your lovely thought. Actually, I enjoyed really listening to you. My question is linked actually to the first one, because we have a model and we see that our model has reached its limit. And somehow we try to bend it, we try to make it work. But sometimes I'm wondering, it's maybe a radical situation, but I'm wondering maybe if we should go back and close our frontiers. Maybe Africa would be better off. I mean, I'm talking here as an European and an African. And when I see, when you look at the history, salvation, colonization, and you see also what's happening still today with the, we talk here about the impact of climate change on Africa, but there is also the impact of this liberalism model in Africa. When I look at a country, for instance, like Congo, I'm just wondering, maybe if there were no foreign corporation, they would at least be in peace. So I'm just wondering, how can we have this equal collaboration when the balance of power is like this, Europe and Africa, and history is like Europe has a big debt towards Africa, it will never give it back, and it's not the point really to make the current generation pay for the past, but how can we at least get equal when I see the results of the European election? It doesn't go like this at all. You were talking about the small ships. So if you look at what the wealth that Europe has taken from Africa, and the fact that the current political atmosphere is saying no to migration, just to give jobs to people, how can we get this equal relationship? It's really an open question. I don't really see how we can do it. I see countries doing it, like South Africa, I see Morocco, which I know better. That's really getting more equal relationship with more nationalism also. But yeah, I don't know, how can we get equal? Thank you.
Easy question.
I didn't want to avoid the question. I wanted to see if Chooks wanted to answer first. So one first thing in your question was closing our borders. That was also about how to ensure that the economic development in African countries is also not so much based on exporting to us in Europe, but also on their own markets. And I believe that's something that is exactly at the heart of the project of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The idea that we need to believe that there is going to be a common market at the scale of the whole continent, even if in reality it might be first at the scale of sub-regions like Western Africa or Southern Africa. But that's a key element of the conversation about how much to try. But when we discuss green industrialization with different countries, I think one of the first questions to ask is, do not first think to export green hydrogen to Germany. Think about how you can base also your industrialization on the regional market, probably not the national market, but the regional market. So that's what it's not the basics, it's not the heart of your question, but it's one part of the question would be to really look. But for some countries, exporting is also something that makes sense. So it's not just closing the borders, but really rebalancing for more internal market thinking. I think that would be really good. Then in terms of, I think my point would be to agree with you on the fact that the accumulation of wealth in Europe has been due to the colonial period, and that now there is an imbalance in financing capacity and in power that is entrenched, and that we need to rebalance it. That's one of the key difficulties when we talk about investments, because what I think, and I picked that from Chuck also to make him react, when he said there are terrible issues of justice, the indicator that he chose was that there was nearly no investment in Africa. So ensuring that this wealth accumulated in other countries can come back through productive investments is, I think, more important than talking about reparations, a word that you did not formulate, but I know it's in the debate. It's really trying to see how we can invest in those countries and what are the conditions for that to be happening. But I don't see that happening, so that's why I'm really asking how to make that really change. And I'm not completely optimistic, but that's why I'm also trying to make arguments why these investments would make sense.
I don't have anything to add to your point.
So we can take another question.
I really agree with your point that the huge imbalance in power is a problem. Recently, led by Macron, he started to talk about equal partnership with Africa, He even organized a conference on that topic, to which Sébastien and I contributed a few slides. And I don't think that really redressing this power imbalance requires a lot of work from Europe. It just requires a little bit of humility and recognition of the damage that have been caused through, extractive relationship in the past. And as Sébastien has been saying, to show intent to collaborate with Africa on the basis of as equals. And there are opportunities to do that. Closing borders will not solve the problem. We need the inflow of investment. We need the inflow of capability. We need the inflow of technology. We need the inflow of resources to be able to help Africa to develop. At the same time, we can't drain the oil and the gas or the lithium and cobalt. This is a great opportunity Africa has, not only to pursue industrialization, but also to support the globe to decarbonize by giving the resources that we have in this critical mineral area. But the partnership has to work for both continents. And as Sébastien has been saying repeatedly, finding ways to do that in a mutually beneficial way and respectful way is the way to go. And I've already suggested in previous intervention that focusing only on government-to-government relationship, which appears to be the way that Europe pursues it, is a wrong strategy. It's a long-term, more sustainable, more assured strategy is to focus also on the layers after the government, the businesses, the civil society, the intelligentsia, the elite, and form strong collaborations long-term. And this will provide the safe places to discuss how this can be done. So I really agree with you, and I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question with Thibault over there.
Yes, thank you. So again, also a big thanks for this very inspiring talk, and with the positive narrative. Someone was talking about positive narrative, that there is really a win-win possibility to collaborate between the two continents. Now, this being said, we have to confront also a bit the reality, and like Isan was mentioning, Europe has not always had a positive role in Africa, so it's difficult to regain the credibility. We also see some movement to decredibilize Europe or France or Belgium, but also for geopolitical reason, because as you mentioned, resources is abundant for some material in Africa. And so my question is how to escape from that system of exploitation. I heard, for instance, someone willing to create hydrogen in Morocco and exporting that to fuel electric car in Europe, while we are producing maybe 4 times what Morocco needs to its own energy. I mean, I don't think this is really a win-win situation. It's still in the same movement of exploitation of the sun, who is shining there, burning people, and trying to convert that into energy. I don't call it a collaboration. And so my last maybe question would be how to, I mean, when we talk about sustainable development, we talk about externalities. So how also to make sure that we have positive externalities of collaboration. That is not only, let's say, financial contracts, but that there is also a true willingness to improve the quality of life on both sides. Africa and big time in Africa and big time also in Europe. Maybe one last comment is it also not really linked to cultural exchange and to cultural development? And by that I mean that you were talking that a lot of African leaders followed their university or their training in Europe, but shouldn't we do the opposite and trying to go there to learn good things of Africa that can serve also a new transformation and a truly sustainable transformation? If we look at what we do in circular economy, repairing things, whatever. I mean, I think that Africa has a lot to learn to Europe on that aspect.
To teach.
To teach.
Thank you. So I'll ask you for relatively brief answers. To teach.
Yes, I have a very brief answer. I agree.
It's a great answer.
And if you want to come to Nigeria, please, I will facilitate that.
I don't take the plane, but I will find a way.
You go by bike.
Thank you. Yeah, more collaboration, and as I said before, at all levels will help. And the other point I want to make is, until I went back recently to Nigeria 4 years ago, having spent nearly 20 years in the UK, I did not quite appreciate how things that I consider little or infinitesimal can make big differences in people's businesses and lives. And so don't think that unless you can give 100 million or 10 million or 50 million or even 5 million, that you cannot make positive difference in Africa. Even $1,000 can change a lot of businesses. So you don't have to start big, but it requires to have the right partners who understand the ecosystem of sustainability innovation. There are several ingenious Africans doing a lot of things, and just a little bit help or support can make a difference. Recently, one African Nigerian was just able to produce, by a clever mixing of salt and water, electrolyte batteries that can power houses for a few hours, and that is a big difference. So let's also think about small-scale innovations and how we can, and innovators, and how we can support them.
One last question by a woman.
Yes, I'd like to go back to the idea that geopolitics and businesses are interconnected, because you mentioned that businesses can play diplomatic roles in geopolitical issues, but I feel like in the current business paradigm, businesses are trying to pretend they're not political, partly because not recognizing a political entity is a way to keep power in a hidden way, and also because of the idea, this is a bit maybe provocative, but that stealing others' resources is bad, except when it's called business. And so my question is, how could embracing the political dimension of businesses could bring real transformations in terms of sustainability? And what would you say to the CEOs in the room to encourage them to embrace this political part of their job and role in society?
I think that's a great question. Dialogue contacted one of the biggest influencers in Nigeria to write an analysis on whether a new refinery that's been established in Nigeria by a man called Dangote, whether it has the right level of sustainability standard, whether basic environmental impact assessment has been done, the extent to which this refinery is congruous with Nigeria's energy transition. The guy, who is a renowned climate skeptic, published the report that he got, that's the invitation, and says, anyone who has been looking for evidence that Europe intends to colonize Africa forever, here is it in black and white. I put my head up by writing a rebuttal by saying, hey, Shell, ExxonMobil, ArcelorMittal, all these other guys are constantly lobbying, right, the government. It's not a crime, it's no harm when a sustainability industry is actually questioning an oil company to make sure that it's environmentally sustainable and this company's, the goal is in tandem with our own ETP. So there is a sense in which some CEOs in the sustainability industry feel that, oh, we are moral, we don't want to lobby. And then they leave the lobbying for the, if you like, the bad guys. I think that we have a good product to sell, And we should recognize that government needs to be informed, and forming partnership, persuading, lobbying, and pushing government to the clean path is something that should be welcome. And any business that doesn't understand the importance of politics, I think is missing a big deal. Thank you.
Sébastien, one last...
No, just exactly on the same line, I think you really put really nailed it by putting the emphasis on the fact that, for instance, in the current, the mandate of the second mandate of von der Leyen at the Commission, we need to ensure that it's not just the average business federation that lobbies. For instance, Food Drink Europe is the association of the food industry in Europe. And in general, if they do the average lobbying, they lobby for stopping the Green Deal, no ambition, etc. And I believe there's really a big thing to be discussed about how we can build alliances of progressive business to talk to the policymakers in a way that where they are going to preserve their competitive advantage over the longer run by having the right regulations in place for their sustainability discussion. And that's, of course, a very political discussion to have, because it's the political discussion about what is the project for Europe in that competition, etc. And so I believe you have I see a lot of the colleagues to whom I talk it's sustainability officers in French companies. So it's a small number. But they are talking to us and saying, could you help us, you think tank and civil society, to build something that is a stronger alliance to lobby in the right direction, rather than having, I mean, it's important that civil society exercises scrutiny over what businesses are doing, but they are looking for something that is more on the alliance side. This is really, I think, along the lines that Chuck was also mentioning. It does not mean that it's going to be easy, because who is the bad guy, who is the good guy? That's we need to enter the conversation about how we operationalize that. But I think there is a big necessity, particularly in Europe currently, but I understand that Chuck is saying the same for Nigeria, for instance, that the alliance of progressive CEOs plays a key political role to maintain the Green Deal and its objectives and to make it a reality. And I mean, that's why we're here.
That's why you're here. Thank you very much for that. Thanks to both of you. But before I thank you and I thank everyone, I would like to leave the floor for a few points of conclusion. It's a hard job. Sandra Gobert is the CEO of Guberna, the Directors Institute here in Belgium, and she agreed to give us a few words of conclusion. So, Sandra.
So thank you very much, Sibyl. I'm really very honored to have the right to try to conclude, because it was a lot of very inspiring ideas, so I'll do my utmost best. I'll also try to not to be too long, because I think it's already late. So as Sibyl introduced Guberna, we are the Institute of Directors, and as you had seen on the slide, our focus is governance, our focus is corporate governance, but for some years now, our focus is on also sustainable value creation. And there's a lot of our members present here today, and so they know that the first mission of boards of directors today is not only anymore to make money for shareholders, but is also to think about the stakeholders. So this is part of what we call the third wave of corporate governance, reflecting on the position of companies in society. And of course, when you reflect on the position of companies in society, what is better than going to an evening about geopolitics, sustainability, transformation, and business? To come back on the title and the slight amendment that Sibyl made to the title, maybe Sibyl should talk to Mrs. von der Leyen, because if we look at a new, as you will have known, I think Mr. Treyer didn't mention it, but the Green Deal does not exist anymore. Unfortunately, the Green Deal has been rebaptized in clean, just, and competitive transition, Sibyl, and not transformation. So I think we're really being one step ahead here, and Sibyl should urgently take contact with Mrs. von der Leyen. So So very happy to have these speakers here tonight to share these insights on geopolitics with our directors and with the CEOs present, because geopolitics are one of the huge challenges to which boards are confronted today, together with some other minor challenges like ecological catastrophes, technology and digital revolution, an increase of regulation and uncertainty, and then, of course, geopolitics. So we all know, I think, that sustainable value creation is today no longer a walk in the park. So that is why we listened very well to what Professor Okereke told us, and I think he summarized his points in 3 main elements. I'm just getting back my notes. And so the first element was interconnection between geopolitics and sustainability. He gave a lot of examples of challenges: energy security, metals and mineral supply chain, food security, water scarcity. But he also made a very important second point, which was to say that these challenges are not only challenges, but also opportunities. And these opportunities, in their turn, lead to new challenges. And I noted, because it really struck me, that also clean energy can lead to wars. And then I think his main point, the last but not the least, is that Europe should not forget Africa, not only because of its very nice people, its sunshine, and its critical raw material potential, but also because climate finance can be used as a soft diplomatic rule. But very important warning and advertisement, we need to build a constructive dialogue with Africa and not just come in and apply our own standards. We should stop moralizing. I think a very nice lesson that we learned there tonight, if we did not know it yet. Mr. Treyer told us some other things, I think, in the same line. 2 main points. So economic security is fundamental for the future of Europe, and he referred to the Draghi report as a shift in European policies. But he said very clearly there cannot be economic security without sustainability. Only sustainability can be the right bet for Europe, and this for several reasons, but a very important one: we do not have a lot of natural resources, so we should cultivate our own angles. And then second, last but not least, we cannot do it without building industrial partnerships with emerging markets, which means, I think that's very important to take with us in our board meetings, that we should look at the partners not only as suppliers, but build very strong relationships, not looking at supply chains only in a zero-sum way, but sharing the value of the partnerships we are setting together. So, to conclude with, I would like to come back to a very interesting question that Professor Okereke asked to Mr. Treyer after their presentations, and this was about the shift in viewpoint from European countries. And if I summarize well, Mr. Treyer talked about the methods. There were some objections against the methods. Other countries are asking for a delay. Other countries want more stabilized horizons, and some even just want to drop the objectives. If you listen well, these resembles a lot to the scenario thinking we are doing in our boards of directors. What are we doing when we're planning investments today? We're all thinking in scenarios, and these scenarios look a lot as the objectives of the several European countries. So thank you, because who says scenario planning also says permanently monitoring indicators to update your strategies. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for sharing your insights on these indicators. And I just want to make a warm appeal. Let us further work together, reflect together, and partner together over the continents and combining the soft power of Europe with the plenitude of African resources and learning from each other as we do the several organizations that are mentioned there, 2030, Huberna, The Shift, Chapter 0, and ULB. And so I gladly hand over now the mic to Sibyl.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Thank you so much. Hard task to make a summary, but you did great. As for Ursula, she won't answer my call, so I will stick to my motto, which is from Walt Whitman, which said, resist much, obey little. And I will continue to argue for transformation. With that, I would like to thank the speakers. A round of applause to the speakers. And of course, all the partners and all the teams inside the partners who made this event possible. So they're on the screen there. Thank you. The Free University of Brussels for the venue, for the streaming, and the tech team also. You know that this is recorded, so you can watch it again or share it with people if you thought it was an interesting evening. So thank you, ULB, for that. And then all of you, because you came, some of us are here live, others were online. Thank you, guys online. Two last things, we have a drink downstairs and food, drinks and food. There's free lunch here. And those of you who came by car, boo, I did, but I have an excuse. The parking 1, Avenue Jeanne, is going to be closed at 22:30 sharp. So if you did park there and want to go home by car, get your car out. So welcome to drinks now.
Thank you, Sylvie.